Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Narrative, for coming. Yeah. Fuck everyone else, right? Thanks for coming. Rohini, thanks for coming. Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Guys, Rohini, I think, is the first person to do debrief and LabNotes. So, yeah. I mean, Stefania's got to do a LabNotes to catch up, no? Yeah, this is LabNotes, and we always, we'll get into the Rohini part, but we always start off with, will you host a LabNotes? So think in your minds, is there anything you'd be interested in talking to your peers and the universe about? It's like anything to do with creativity. Today, though, how to start your own podcast. We were with Podcast Royalty, at least in Tadium's sense, the Combine sense, yeah?
Small R royalty.
3 years you've been doing it?
3 years. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. I have a bunch of questions for you. I'm going to hold to after because I think you're just going to start by taking people through literally how you've done it, how they might be able to do it, and hopefully inspiring people. Anyone here have a podcast? Made one and quickly stopped? No? I feel like that's the move, is like people start and then quickly they're like, shit, this is a lot of work.
It's true.
But maybe you have tips for that. So, all right, let's get in. There's that TBD part. Maybe you could help us determine the TBD. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so I'm going to leave you here. Then I'll come back. I got a few questions, but think of some if you have some as well. We can do a little Q&A at the end. And yeah, let's welcome Rohini again. Thanks so much. Yay.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll take you through the steps of starting a podcast, but I find that my favorite teaching method is actually sharing mistakes. I think a lot of people celebrate the wins, and that's great, and you're happy for them, but it actually really helps to understand the fumbles or where things go sideways. And I think the whole starting a podcast and then burning out is fairly common. My podcast is currently on a hiatus for that very specific reason. We are picking it back up in the next few weeks, so but that is something that happens as well. So I'll take you through the ins and outs, and think of questions. If there is something that you want to interrupt and ask me a question, I think you can. Max, is that but otherwise, certainly I'm happy to answer questions towards the end. So as of this year, over 50% of Canadians have listened to a podcast ever. And when you think about people who listen to podcasts all the time or listen to a podcast frequently, that's about 30% of Canadians. Any of you listen to podcasts regularly? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're better than the rest of Canada. And this actually is higher than the American number. So usually we're always like the tiny fraction and we have to do but we're only a tenth of their population, but it's 38% in the US and 50% in Canada. Any guesses on the top genres of podcasts in terms of popularity? Yes, Eric. Murder, crime. Yes, it's in there. And pardon? Sports, not in the top 4. That was one of my guesses. Not in the top 4. Yes, news in the top 4. Yeah, news, murder. Okay, so news, murder, these days the same thing, but those are the top 4 in order. Comedy number 1, culture number 2, news and crime. I thought business would be higher, but it's not. So those are the top genres of podcasts currently. And people start podcasts for all kinds of different reasons. I've just taken 3 big podcasts and talked about them. The Joe Rogan Experience, I don't know if anybody listens to the podcast often or has listened to the Elon Musk episode where they smoked up during the episode. I think when you think about a podcast, it's who's it for and why are you doing it? And so Joe Rogan has his podcast because he has a mass audience. And the intent is really influence and wide appeal. He sometimes ruffles feathers, but really it's the Joe Rogan opinion, on blast. Archetypes with Meghan Markle. Again, a wide audience, but the intent there is fundraising for the Archewell Foundation, which of course is their purpose work. And then the Gary V audio experience, so closer to our world, really focuses on marketers, small business, startups, and he very much monetizes his podcast so that it becomes his business development stream and has advertising as well, which we'll come back to later. So the first thing you got to do, as we do with any plan for any client, is you got to have some goals. And so these are 5 of the questions. They're not all of them, but 5 questions that you should really consider. What is the business challenge or context? Sometimes it's not business. It's just, why should I have a podcast? Does it lend itself to the audio format? I think if anybody was early in the podcast popularity days of listening to Serial, it really was, it kind of let you follow the story in a way that you conjured the visuals in your mind. That's really powerful. And that's why true crime podcasts are so powerful. Who's the audience? What do you want them to do? And what's the intent of the content? And with each of these steps, I'll kind of give you a little bit of an example from when I started my podcast. And so firstly, my podcast is called ABCDEI. And it's called that because we took, the DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And my co-creator of the podcast, Susan Diaz, and I, we found that early days of the pandemic, around the time George Floyd was murdered, when we were talking about this reckoning that the world was going through of social justice and certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, that people wanted to do something, but they didn't know what the right thing was, so they either did the performative thing or they did nothing. And it just felt like there was, okay, I'll do a black square, but the black square is bad, and it's, it's not enough. And it's show us, you're bored, or show us your purpose. And it just felt like there was this incredibly high barrier to entry. To do the right thing, to be woke, to be socially just, to be a responsible company. And so really what we wanted to do is make it simple. We wanted to distill what it was to be inclusive, to be building equity in whatever world you live in, whether that's business, whether that's school, whether that's your personal life, in a way that hadn't been done before. And so that really was our kind of context. We used the audio format because we were all home, and the only images we were seeing were people's eyes over their masks. I think I need you to log back in. And so that was, so we knew the audio format would work well. We're also both marketers, and so we were comfortable talking. And really our intent for people, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail at the next step, but really we wanted to be an accessible, approachable place for people to learn about being more inclusive. And we wanted to break some stereotypes and myths about how much work it took to be inclusive. And so really what we wanted them to do is follow along, listen more, practice some of the things that we shared. And the intent was so that people would start to build, hey, do you know that all it takes is A and B, and you can be more inclusive as a manager, as a leader, as a parent, as a high schooler, whatever world they lived in. So I always come back to these 3 questions. These were the 3 that we wrestled with the most when we were deciding if we were going to start a podcast. So why this, meaning the topic, why now, and why me, or in our case, why us? The topic, as I said, it was the right time. There were lots of conversations happening all over the world, sometimes among people with lived experience, sometimes among people trying to be allies, sometimes among people fumbling as allies. It made sense now at the time, and then it made sense. So this is where we really sort of carved our lane. there was a lot of masterclass level content. There were lots of people who had a body of work that was 20 years deep, that had been doing this at the academic level, at the policy level, at the business level. And they had this amazing, amazing body of work, but there was a lot of jargon. There was a lot of, you have to be a CEO, you have to be a vice president, you have to be, the principal of a school in order to do these things. And we wanted to get past that barrier. What happens if I'm just a person that wants to do good? What if I'm starting to be a manager, I'm getting my first job? And so for us, that's really where we identified our niches. We wanted to be approachable content that, yes, we could go into theory and talk about, critical race theory or talk about the minority myth or meritocracy. But we would, at the end of each episode, we would say, okay, if you listen to nothing else, do these two things, or never do this again, or always do this when you talk to somebody new, or when you finish a meeting, or when you present a plan, whatever that world was. And we always come back to that. I mean, now we're 4 seasons in, and that's something that we always come back to is, do we still have a distinct voice? Does it still have resonance now? And does the topic itself still make sense, or do we need to evolve it? Okay, and then getting into the logistics. So again, some of the things to think about: format. So we have a dual host format, which lends itself to, some interesting things. We once had a duo guest. They were a pair that was sort of educators, and so that was interesting because there were 4 of us. And so we made sure that for that episode, we had some video clips so people could actually make sense of who was talking at any given point. Because these are topics where people get passionate, and there's raised voices, and there's excitement, and sometimes there's tears. So it was important to think about that. It's really important to know what the length of an average episode is. I will say this: nobody sticks to one length for the entirety, and if they do, then they're probably missing some good stuff. But we have episodes that are 15 minutes long, and we have episodes that are 42 minutes long. But our sweet spot is 20 to 25 minutes, and that's kind of where we aim for. And you'll see this when you go into production and editing, my podcast is very organic. So part of why we don't over-edit our conversations or the recordings is so that, again, we want to build that approachable. Somebody who says all the time is approachable. You can go and make a mistake in front of them. You can share something that you did wrong, and it just, again, lowers the barrier to entry. That was kind of our founding principle behind this. There are episodes that have weekly drops. There are episodes that drop monthly. So that, again, is something to think about. If it is true crime, do not drop monthly. That is cruel to your listeners. That may sometimes there's twice a week drops. Sometimes it's weekly. So you want to build that cadence so you're building anticipation. But at the same time, I have some podcasts where Apple reminds me there are 18 episodes, that have dropped since you last tuned in. So really finding that sweet spot that matches the cadence. all good. And language, that's the other, and language here has kind of 2 meanings. One is, are you translating? Are you closed captioning? Depending, we did our first season, and then sort of did a little bit of audience analytics, and then decided that we did want to have closed captioning. We both have non-traditional Canadian accents, so which now are Canadian accents. And so we also kept closed captioning on for anybody who wanted to listen to us but perhaps couldn't follow along. And also language from do you swear on the podcast? There are podcasts that have swearing, and it's part of the vibe. There are others that will not, and they're business and button down. And so we're kind of in between. We don't swear, I don't think. We may have sworn a couple of times. But it's more casual and it's more natural versus it being kind of scripted and businessy. which is ironic because I think 90% of our listenership is businesses, so business owners and mid to senior level career folks. And then seasons. So we've done our 4 seasons thematically. So our first season was Get to Know Us. Our second season was Let's Put Some Definitions Out There. Our third season was Let's Debate Some Stuff. And then our fourth season has been, we did more episode arcs, like how do you build your inclusion muscle? How do you build, how do you really become an ally? What is allyship? Not what is allyship? But some seasons, it's, they don't necessarily have to follow a theme. If you look at Joe Rogan Experience, you look at Armchair Podcast, they don't have themes. It really is, episode to episode based on who the guests are. The other thing to consider too is we switch between episodes where it's just the two of us and then where we invite guests. So again, sometimes, we had an episode, I think one of the most powerful episodes we've had was one where we talked about the family in London that was shot in an act of Islamophobia. And that was a rant. That was a teary, sad, angry rant. And it was important to us that we didn't have guests on that episode. It was just the two of us sharing our experience as, two non-Muslim women who had grown up in a Muslim country. And so having, a little bit of that window, but without it being personal lived experience. And so that was a very specific worldview, and we wanted to keep it to just us. All good. We've also had episodes where we've got really personal and talked about our experience. I think most people who are diversity, equity, inclusion advocates probably started because of, a not great experience that happened to them. And so when we have shared snippets of our lives and what has prompted us to take this path and focus on DEI, that's certainly something where, again, we've chosen not to have guests on those episodes. Any questions? I feel like I've talked a lot. Okay. Production.
Do you know all these images? They're all from top 10
I know
podcasts.
most of them. I don't know this one.
What's her? I think it's your Call Me Daddy is her thing.
Oh, Alex.
Yeah? Alex Cooper.
Yeah. Yes,
She's big time now, but I've never listened.
I've never seen the image, but I know the podcast. So yeah, I mean, this is similar to what we do with client social assets. It's always great to have a cover image, and I say this without including the cover images in that previous slide where I talked about the 3 podcasts. It's great to have people want to know, even if you're audio, what you look like or where you're recording. And so the image that we had was a picture that was taken of me right after we recorded our first episode. And so we're actually terrible. And I think this is true of PR and social media practitioners. We're terrible at PRing ourselves. We're terrible at, doing those things for ourselves. Certainly Susan and I are. And so that is the only image. When Eric asked me to send some images for this, I was like, well, I have one, so I hope it works. And so, it is great to in those moments, have a library of assets that you can use to promote your podcast. Think about guests. One of the greatest ways to promote your podcast, and we'll go into promotion after, is be a guest on other people's podcasts, because that cross-promotion is fantastic. Thinking about accessibility, and so, again, we do closed captioning on any of the video clips that we share of our podcast, but we use Otter to transcribe every single episode. Sometimes it's interesting what it turns up, but that's AI. But we also do include show notes, and we even have links to the full episode transcript for people who do want it. We've only had a couple of people reach out to us for those, but it's important to us that we have that. For images that we have shared in the past, we always alt text it, so that again it's just more accessible. On our podcast, I'm the writer, so at the end of each episode, we don't script our episodes, we keep them free flow. We have 3 to 5 points we generally want to hit in the episode, but otherwise we just sort of hit record. We also do not pause. We do it in one straight shot. If there's something that goes horribly, then one of us just says, we're going to say that sentence again, and then our editor, takes care of that. And then from our transcription, I write show notes, which is in this episode, Susan and Rohini explore, as well as the episode summary. So if you aren't an audio format person, you can go to the website and see what, episode 16 was all about, or what, we were doing talking to a city councilor, or what we were doing talking to a CEO of a bank, or, whoever the guest may have been. Okay, recording and editing is a big topic in itself. If any of you are going to start a podcast, we can have a separate conversation, either with me or with Neil, because I know that you're producer of our debrief podcast as well. It's really, it's fairly simple. A lot of podcasts were started during the pandemic. Really, all you need is a quiet space and a podcast mic. We have recorded some episodes of ours just on our laptops, and generally people can't tell the difference as long as you're in a quiet space. But I also, there are good podcast mics. Some of them come with filters. And then really we keep it scripted. We keep just our points scripted. We don't actually script the whole episode. And then we do audio and video. So we do video so that we have content to promote on social. We're not great at promoting on social, so that's a goal. But we do have that, and especially where we have multiple guests, that certainly helps. And then in terms of software, there's so many things out there. I would say if you're starting a podcast and you're just experimenting, we started with just doing Zoom calls because that then gave us the video and audio, and then just use GarageBand to edit it. As we got more sophisticated, we now use Adobe Premiere for the editing. And then Neil, you said you use Logic? There you go. So, and then if you have long distance, you have many people on a podcast, Smartless is a great one where they have 3 hosts. They don't always record together, although most of their images are recording together. Squadcast is a really good one where you have people come in from all kinds of places. And then the other thing too that I, just in terms of spotting the theme, sometimes we've gone into an episode. So usually how we do it is we book a 45-minute time slot with our guest. And we use the first 10 minutes as a green room discussion. So we just say, what do you want to talk about? Our podcast is very clear. This is not where you come to promote your book or your thing. We talk about real topics that are related to inclusion. So it could be your personal experience. It could be something that you've seen. It's something that you want to rant about. So we talk about that in the first 10 minutes. And then we hit record at 10 minutes, and then it goes to a maximum of 35 minutes with 2 or 3 exceptions. And then we just edit anything where somebody has said, I want to do that take again. But otherwise, we just sort of let it go. Sometimes the themes that we think we're going into are not the themes that we come out of. And sometimes it's at the editing stage that our editor, Jeremy, will come back and say, I know you wanted to make this, this episode is about M is for microaggression, but there's actually a really good, theme here around something else. And so we have sometimes pivoted on topics based on what he sees from the editing suite, because he's a little bit distanced from us and our agenda. Okay, this is the part that we are terrible at. Sharing and growing. So this is promotion. So I was telling Max this story. We recorded a trailer at the beginning of season 1, and part of our reaction when we listened to it, anything that you recorded 3 years ago is cringe, right? Like, ugh, why did we do that? But it's also it's the thing that we hold ourselves to every season. Like, are we still accessible? Are we still the non-master class that still has wisdom? Are we still prescriptive? Are we giving people value and leaving them with 1, 2, 3 things that they can do starting now, where they don't have to be a vice president, an owner, a principal, we have our podcast on our website, and then we do Spotify and Apple. There's a ton of networks out there. Cross promotion is important. We have our guests sometimes will tell us they prefer it to be on SoundCloud. So I think we have a SoundCloud link off our website. And then really it's about promotion. So social content and strategy. And we use our clips to also put into our blog. So our blog does sometimes have either a GIF made out of a conversation we had or an actual clip in there, so that, again, people have different ways of learning. And so we try to appeal, and we don't want format to be the reason that people don't learn. And then finally, just look back at your season. We batch record, so we usually do 3 to 5 episodes in one go. And so usually at the end of it, we're exhausted. And the next day, we come back and say, okay, what was good? What did we think worked and didn't work? And then when we actually post the episodes, we have built a small trusted group of people who will give us the straight goods on, like, that was rambly, that was, I could hardly hear Susan, I could definitely hear a child in the background, you kind of missed the point on this. And so it's really important to have that, because sometimes what we think didn't work actually really resonates, and vice versa. We always ask our guests for feedback. Many of our guests have been on many podcasts or have podcasts of their own, so we subtly pitch ourselves on their podcast if they are podcasters. But otherwise, we certainly ask for their feedback, and we ask them to promote the episodes as well. And then we make and share changes. So I never want to change the essence of the podcast. I don't want it to be a masterclass. But we have changed things along the way. We've definitely done some tests and some swings, and some didn't work. And so we've come back on some of those, and then other ones we've made those changes and then stuck with it. So yeah, I think so that's kind of really it. Build a goal, think about those 3 questions: why this, why now, why me? And then it's just logistics and production. It's a lot of fun. Like, if you're not having fun doing a podcast, you're doing it wrong. Think about it to be a topic you really care about or know a lot about or want to learn about. That's, for us, our podcast, we have made blunders on air. We have misgendered a couple of people on air. We didn't edit those out because it was important to us that if we say we're not a masterclass and we're learning out loud and unlearning out loud, we actually want our audience to hear us unlearn and walk back things that didn't land or offended. And not saying, but my intent was not no. In that moment, walk it back. It's not about you. Somebody, it went sideways. So, yeah, questions.
Whoa, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, clap it out. I got a bunch of questions, and then if anyone can think of some. But first up, thank you so much for doing this. Was this stressful part of the day? Fun part of the day?
Fun
part
of the day.
Okay, yeah. Good. You were just talking about unlearn, which I've listened to a few episodes. I love that theme. I'm wondering, have you had to apply unlearning within, because unlearn relating to DEI, do you have to unlearn anything for like making a podcast or outside of that world?
Yeah. I think for us, we talked about not swearing. We had a couple of episodes where we tried to get our elbows up and be more aggressive. It didn't work. It didn't feel like us. And so, yeah, there's definitely things that we've tried. The more boring things that we've tried certain software or certain processes that didn't work. But I would say, on certain topics, we wanted to have an unfiltered conversation. And for us, we chose to translate that in say what you're thinking. And I think it didn't feel organic. For me, it didn't feel organic because I don't really swear a whole lot. And so it just felt like I was putting on a persona, and I could hear it. Mm. And a few people told me about that particular episode. So.
But when you do swear, does it have gravity?
I think so.
Yeah.
Few and far between, but it's powerful.
Has making a podcast impacted how you consume podcasts?
Oh, yeah.
Like, can you still enjoy them, or are you like picking them apart and being like,
Oh, no, I think I enjoy them more because I'm not in the hot seat. I can just, I'm just an audience member here. I have nothing to contribute, nothing, you know.
Right.
And so, and in fact, I like listening to a mix of like professional, like armchair podcast and, you know, that
what else?
level.
What else is on there? What's on your feed?
So it's funny, you had a few of them. Smartless is one of them. I really like Modern Love, New York Times. I have very eclectic mix. I like Code Switch in the DEI space. I like Front Burner. Yeah, quite
What's
an
Front
eclectic.
Burner? I don't know.
CBC.
Oh, yes. Should know that. We're in the building.
Yeah.
You and your co-host. I think you mentioned you guys were drinking buddies. That's how it started. You became friends.
So, funny story is, so Susan used to work for my mom. My mom was a CEO of an ad agency. And so Susan was her, I think she was maybe an account manager at the time. And I was in my first year of university and came back home for the summer and got the nepotism summer intern job at the agency.
Nepo baby.
Yeah, Nepo baby. And so Susan was, you know, semi-responsible and made in charge of the 3 summer interns. And she was great. And we thought she was the coolest because she was like the right amount of older than us and wiser than us. But then at the end of the summer, we went out drinking once and I was like, this is so much better than you being my manager. And so, yeah, we just switched gears. I don't think my mom loved that at the time because I was 19. But here we are, like 20 years later, still friends.
Do you ever drink while you're recording?
We have drank a couple of episodes.
Better, worse, same?
I think it's the balance, right? You got to do like the 1 or 2 glasses of wine and then stop.
That's how I am with pool.
Yeah. There you go.
It's the exact same.
It's the same. Pool and podcasting, the same.
Yeah, you want to get in the zone, but
Yeah.
not too far.
Exactly.
Anything, you've done like 41, 42?
Yeah,
40
episodes.
40 something episodes. Anything now looking back, like anything that you're surprised that you love about it or surprised that you hate about it? Like, do you love the editing or do you hate
So
geeking out
I
on
still
stats?
love the editing. I love the rawness of our editing. You hear a lot of you hear some background. I still love that.
Anything surprise you though, where you're like, oh, I love this part of it?
Yeah. And I still really love, to me, the thing that I love about our podcast the most is we've stayed true to that. Like, I don't, like, I go back and listen to episodes once in a while. But we haven't really had episodes where we've strayed from that, like, do these 2 things. And I think for me, I'm a very, like anybody who works with me knows this, I'm a very action-oriented person. I don't like theory and then just like, okay, let's all digest. No, like what are the 2 things that we're doing right now? And so I love that it stayed true to that.
It's the same intro or like same words.
Yeah, same words.
So that's amazing. Is there any ways that it's evolved clearly for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got better. I think we've got better about, I think, letting the conversation go while at the same time, like sometimes we have listened to an episode and it's like, what were we talking about? We just like fun tangent drinking buddies conversation. But I think we've now learned how to thread that well, where it's organic, but it's meaningful.
Gotcha. And then if you were going to make another one, you're going to start your own podcast empire. What's your next show about? Like, what would the topic be?
You know?
It's a tough one.
I think it might be one for kids. Like, I really like, so the idea of ABCDEI was that you sort of have to code it and learn like the alphabet. There's no ego about it. Like, no 3-year-old is like, I don't know the alphabet. Well, of course you don't know, right? You're going to start from scratch. That's why you go to school. And so I think that would be where I'd want to go next. Like, why not actually start? Like, I think a few people have probably heard this from me. Like, I think, to me, my end state of DEI thinking is I want it to become the new common sense. Right now, it's good sense, but it's not common. And I think why not start at that age where kids are learning language and they're learning rules and, so.
But still in the DEI space. That would be your next thing.
I think so.
Okay. Not about like restaurants in
But
Toronto.
I think, that would be fun. I don't know that I would do that as a podcast. I think that's like a fun thing. But I think it would be, I don't think it would be about like lessons. I think it would be about characters and like, storytelling.
Okay. Anyone have any questions about podcasting or anything? Kathy? Let me re-ask that just so it's on mic.
Yeah.
So what has been your most successful episode to date, and what would you attribute that to?
So our most listened to episode is our episode 2, which is interesting because it's one of the episodes that makes me cringe because we were so new. It was like hour 1 of being a podcaster. But a lot of people, it's definitely our most listened to podcast. And the feedback we've got is it felt like the truest sense of hearing the two of us in who we are, but in like marrying it with what we are trying to do with the podcast. Our most successful episode with a guest has been the one with Stacey Lee Kong, who Narrative will know as a journalist. She came on to talk about the monarchy and Megxit, and it turned into a conversation. It was one of those where we started with a sort of, let's talk about these 3 things, and she was just so interesting, and the conversation took, multiple turns. She actually recommended the rescue organization that I got a dog from last month, and so really took some turns, but that was probably our most popular episode. I think that one was most popular because it was at the time. They announced Megxit on Monday, we dropped on Wednesday, and so, timing.
Megxit's such a good sticky term.
Right?
Like Brexit, not great, but then somehow twisting it.
Yeah.
So good. Anyone else? Another one. Kathy.
So I can't think of too many branded podcasts that are great, that connect back to brand, but I actually think that's why it makes them great, right? So if you can sponsor a conversation and step the hell away and let it happen so that it's in your ecosystem. You're talking about AI, you're talking about, a topic that means a lot to your company, but you're not in the conversation. Number one thing that makes me say, hell no, is our brand manager can be the host. No, bad, don't do it. As dynamic as your brand manager may be, I think that's really where, like, my view is church and state on that one is just you have to have that separate, because it's hard not to. Just from my own, it's hard not to get protective about your brand. But if you're having a conversation about something that's a dotted line to your brand but isn't about your brand, it's hard not to take it personally. So I would say I can't think of too many branded podcasts that are in there. I will say podcast advertising is definitely something that's evolved. So podcast ads, even a few years ago, sounded like radio ads. So they weren't great. Joe Rogan's a good example of somebody who reads the ads, right? And I think there's like a 79 or 80% higher chance that you listen, because if this podcast, who has their own personal brand that's, being held high, will read something, they really believe it. It's kind of like influencer, right? If they're going to shill it, there's... sometimes brands will do it that way, where it'll be a red ad about, a service or an offering. But yeah, branded podcasts. I think the examples, and I'll share some. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now. I think there was HP did one on cybersecurity, but they did it in a storytelling way from the perspective of a hacker, right? Like, how do you become a hacker? That's really interesting, and you don't need to be into electronics, and right. It was bookended, yeah. Exactly. So they did it like mini-series style, and it was all about, so they were telling you about cybersecurity, and the read between the lines was, this is all the things that our systems are built to protect you from. But following the story of how a person becomes a hacker, and taking away the villain title from a hacker was an interesting kind of more human take on it.
Are you going to start a podcast? I'd subscribe.
We'll talk.
I would subscribe. It's called Finger in the Wind for those watching the video. Anyone, final questions before we wrap it up? Should we do a plug here? Do we have? Yes. Pull out your phones, follow, subscribe, share.
Do reviews.
I follow. I found it very helpful. Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you.